Welcome back to the Future of Learning. I'm your host, Miss Sutherd, and today I have the opportunity of sitting down with Alvin Abraham. You are the executive director of Teach, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So what drew you to education, and what has your path been to this position?
Yeah, it's crazy. I cannot believe I'm saying this out loud, but 20 years ago when I graduated from college, which is insane, I did a program, an AmeriCorps program called Teach for America.
Okay.
And it was, it's a program where you commit to teaching for 2 years in under-resourced community in America. And the idea is that you're learning about the educational system and the inequities that exist. And the idea is that you leave just better armed with the knowledge and then hopefully with the fortitude to do something about it.
Yeah.
I never thought I'd be a teacher or working in education for my entire career, but that really sparked for me this passion to ensure that every kid has access to the best education possible that allows them to have some sort of post-secondary success, whatever that is for them.
Yeah.
And more often than not in our country, where you grow up, sort of the zip code that you're in truly determines the schools you have access to, but then also ultimately determines the sort of usually the financial means that you're able to then get to. Based on the schools you have access to. So I've stayed in education. I taught for many years, mostly in elementary schools, and then was a principal here in the Houston Independent School District at a couple of different elementary schools. And then I moved in 2012 to the Twin Cities, so Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I worked for a charter network called KIP, the Knowledge is Power program.
Okay.
Helped establish the Minnesota region. And then I actually worked in higher ed too.
Wow.
Yeah, I helped establish for the University of St. Thomas in the Twin Cities a new 2-year program that was a bridge program for young people who may not be able to access traditional 4-year programs right out of high school.
Okay.
And it gives them 2 years of really incredible academics paired with lots of supports at a really affordable cost, so they can get those first 2 years out of the way. And then there was lots of support for them to transition to 4-year programs or into the workforce. But then I met my husband and we ended up having 2 kids. And our second child, Ozzy, was born in May of 2020. So it was right in the thick of the pandemic, the craziness of the election. George Floyd had just been murdered in the Twin Cities. And we just had, this huge step back. We're what ultimately matters in life? Family is everything to us. And we knew we needed a support system. So I grew up in Houston. My parents were here. My sister, when she moved back home, moved nearby them and had so much help and support from them. So we said, let's go.
So you moved to Texas?
We moved to Texas, and I, began networking with some old contacts in Houston. And one of them, who was the woman who hired me for my very first job as a principal in Houston.
Oh my God.
I reached out to her and she's like, listen, I'm on the board of this really great nonprofit called Teach to educate all children. Learn more about us because we have the executive director position open. You should look into it. And then the next thing I know, just a few months later, all of our stuff was on a truck and we were moving across country in the middle of a pandemic to Houston. So in October of 2020, we moved to Houston and I started here at Teach.
Wow. What was that transition throughout your career like of leaving the classroom? I feel like that's a huge topic of conversation right now is educators moving on, and you did it.
Yeah. Working with students is the most incredible, rewarding, fun, exciting thing on the planet. It can also be challenging and, tiring and complicated as well. I absolutely loved it. And even as I sort of made moves in my career, ultimately, the goal was to be able to do more to support teachers and kids and families. And so when I transitioned from the classroom to an administrative position as like an assistant principal or principal, it was like, cool. Like, I'm moving from a spot where I'm, impacting, maybe 25 or 50 kids, and then to a school where I was the principal of 1,000 kids, right? So I had daily interaction impact to 1,000 kids. And then when I moved into like a KIPP region, there was more kids than that. And then of course at a university level, and now at Teach, right? So we work in 20 schools in the Houston Independent School District and the Aldine Independent School District, two large school systems, public school systems here in the Houston area. And we serve almost 13,000 kids.
Oh my goodness. So can you, what is Teach? Can you tell me about it a little bit more?
Of course. Yeah. So TEACH is an acronym that stands for To Educate All Children. We were founded in 2005 with the idea that we truly believe that every kid deserves a phenomenal teacher. We know that really good instruction is super important, right, for kids to be able to move academically. But we also know that really good instruction can't happen with a phenomenal classroom atmosphere and climate. And so our work is partnering alongside schools, administrators, and teachers to train them in a very specific set of nonverbal classroom management skills that helps them lead their classroom from a place of influence versus power, and really keep the student at the center of the classroom and preserving relationships with students, really preserving the teacher's energy, and ultimately leading to more instructional time in the classroom.
Wow. And you just serve Houston, the Houston area?
Currently, that is where we are. We do have aspirations to move more regionally, and then really like sort of long-term plans to grow outside of the region as well. Right now, we're really focused on growing our footprint here in the Houston community, and then spending a lot of time these next couple of years sort of ideating, as everybody knows, the pandemic allowed us to go virtual and work with people across a multitude of platforms. And even now, as things are going more back to in-person and not as much that world, people are finding those opportunities to do that sort of hybrid environment. And we're really wanting to capitalize that and think like, how can we work with a group of schools potentially in Tennessee or in California or someplace else where we might do a couple of visits a year, but we're also doing training and coaching virtually too.
Are teachers pretty receptive to the practices that you guys teach?
What I love about teachers is that they are really harsh critics, right? And so if you get the stamp of approval from a teacher, that is a really big deal because their time is super limited and they know their students best and they know what works, right? And so, teachers who know us and have worked with us absolutely love us because what we do works, right? When we find that we're working with a new school, we spend a lot of time on that front end with buy-in, making sure that they can see our work, that live in classrooms like the ones that they work with, students they work with, that we're showing all those proof points. And then we do like little small sort of snippets of like teaching. So we do intense professional development, but then we come in their classrooms and we actually coach teachers one-on-one on the skills.
Oh, that's nice.
So we lean heavily on relationship, and then we work on a couple of skills that we know will have pretty immediate results, and then they see that it works. And from there, once they buy in, it's just like this amazing relationship, and we see a lot of growth in their classroom. So yes, but it's not easy, right? Because teachers have a lot of their points and a lot of competing variables, and so we work really hard at building that trust and winning them over.
Yeah, that's awesome. I taught for 6 years, and I remember.
Oh, great! What did you teach?
Elementary school, 4th grade, kindergarten, 3rd grade. I've taught basically all the elementary grades.
I love it.
It was so much fun. But I remember going to professional development and being like, you don't know my kid. Like,
most of the time it's really boring.
Yes.
Most of the time, they don't know anything about the students that you serve. Which every campus is incredibly different. And, usually like there's nothing that happens after the training. And so our training is incredibly interactive. We do lots of role plays. We show lots of video of actual teachers. We learn the community that we're presenting in. And so we want to make sure that the students that we are showing in the videos are representative of the students that the teachers are serving. And then again, we do that follow-up coaching. So we do that intense training, and then we come into your classroom and say, cool, how can we help you implement this skill above pause whisper, right? And we model it for the teacher, we watch them do it, we give them feedback on it. That's the part that teachers love the most.
Yeah.
Right? If they get that one-on-one attention and support.
Yeah, that's awesome. How have you seen classroom management change over the past few years?
I think there was this, I know there was this wave of, compliance was king, right? It's like, if you can get your kids quiet and you could have them sitting in rows and completing the work, like that was it, right? That was the thing.
Yeah.
And I remember being a first year teacher and I had 27 first grade kids in my class. I was just like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And
never quiet.
Yeah, right. Exactly. But I do remember like being told like that was what was looked at as like a positive, thing from the principals. Like kids are quiet and they're working in their rows.
Successful classroom, yes.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Right. And there's been an enormous shift, which I'm so happy about, of it truly being about relationships with students. It truly being about, learning not being sort of like quiet in rows, but active participation, collaboration. And yes, of course, students need time on task.
Yeah.
They need to know how to work independently for sure, because until higher ed changes, which it's not going to change for a long time, students need to know like how to leave K-12 and be able to work independently for multiple hours on a 12-page paper and read, multiple articles and like take that and like, make their own, analysis from it. And that takes stamina and work, right? So I know that it's a mix of both, right? But it truly has shifted to like, how are we building an atmosphere in the classroom that's really positive and safe and loving, but also joyful, right? So teachers can have fun with kids, and students truly are helping be a part of the learning in the classroom, as opposed to like this old model of sage on the stage and everyone is doing what the teacher says constantly. And don't get me wrong, like it's a mix and it needs to be just like it is in any setting.
Totally.
Ultimately, it should be this sort of like safe, warm, welcoming, loving atmosphere. Now that I have 2 little kids, it's like, that's what I want for mine.
Yeah.
Right? So,
yes.
I expect that any parent would want the same for theirs.
Yeah. Are you K through 12?
We are. We work with teachers who are serving 3 and 4-year-olds in preschool and teachers who are teaching calculus in 12th grade. So we work across the spectrum.
What a range, because I feel like classroom management when you're in elementary school is so much different than classroom management when you're in high school.
Yeah. I agree. And at the same time would say that at the end of the day, it's really based on a handful of things, right? Relationships, right? Like kids need to know that you care about them, that you have their best interest in mind. And they will do anything you say, right? If they know that.
Yeah.
It's also like about structure, right? And having clear systems and routines and procedures from everything from like how to use technology in your classroom, or how to submit an assignment, or, how to transition from your desk to the carpet, right?
Yes.
In pre-K or kindergarten, right? So it's that systems and routines and procedures. And then ultimately, like, having some tools in your toolkit to be able to, okay, if there's this tough moment or interaction with the kid, like what can I do to help bring the breathing of everyone down?
Yeah.
do to really like de-escalate and move to a place of positivity. And those are things that whether a kid's 3 or whether a kid's 16 are still things. It'll look different for sure.
Right.
But it's really based on a core set of things that we know can work across a continuum.
Yeah. So for people who aren't educators, can you explain the benefits of a well-managed classroom?
Yeah. I would say, so it's funny because I really wish that I was a parent in my early years of teaching.
Yeah.
I'm a parent now, and it's like, I'm like, oh my God, why did I do that in my classroom? Or why did I say that to my students? Because you learn, having a kid around you 24/7, it's similar to parenting in a way, right? Like, just like in your classroom, and just like at home, like you want to obviously develop relationships with your students, right? Or your kids, right? Get to know them. You want to know what they like, what they don't like. When you're making dinner, you want to get everything ready, but bedtime routine, and bedtime routines are different for both of my kids. And it's based on like what they each need. And similarly, like you want to, of course, if you've got 25 kids in your class, or if you teach, high school and you've got 150 kids, that's, it's going to be different than having like 1 or 2 at home, but relationships are key. Organization and like systems and structures, right? Like most people who have kids, like they don't just, every day is not different usually. And if it is, it's chaotic and it's hard and it's stressful, right? It's the same thing in a classroom.
Right.
When you have kids, for example, arrive first thing in the morning, there's usually some sort of routine. They come in, they put their backpacks away, they are going to get at a set, prescribed group of materials that they might need in the morning.
Yeah.
Usually there's some sort of instructions on the board. It's like, take these things out, work on this thing quietly, finish this thing, put your homework in this area. Like there's some sort of routine and procedure, right? And it's similar, right? To like how you sort of manage your household around, all right, dinner time, I need this kid to set the table. I need this kid to help with dishes, or we're going to come home and we're going to immediately get our homework out of the way so then we can go into playtime. And then when that, timer goes off, we're going to transition to dinner time, right? So you're still setting up those systems and routines and procedures in the same way that you do. And then just like at home, when, your child, might make a mistake or might, use an inappropriate word or do something that they're not supposed to do to their sibling or whatever, like the way you interact with them and the way you sort of like deal with that one sort of moment is important, and it makes a difference in how that kid behaves later on in the evening or that next day, and just like it does in the classroom, right? So usually you have some sort of prescribed way of the way you deal with that as a parent, right? Based on your philosophy and what the culture you're trying to build in your family, and it's different from family to family. Same thing in the classroom, right? Like, what is the culture I'm trying to build in my classroom? What's my philosophy on how I deal with behavioral infractions, and like what's my system, and how am I going to ultimately complete it and get the end result, which is, for most teachers, it's like, I want the students to do their work and do it really at a high level and then to learn, right? And ultimately there'll be a positive relationship at the end of it. And so the steps you take to get there are going to be different from classroom to classroom and teacher to teacher, of course, but should be aligned. So I'd say like that's the closest thing I could, say to like how someone can understand it. Yeah. It's so important, classroom culture, to teaching. Yes. You can have the best lesson plan for anything you want to teach.
They're not going to care.
If you don't have the respect of your students, or if it's not organized, or you're not able to call their attention, whole group, or transition from one thing to the next effectively, it's just, you're not going to get through your lesson.
No. And I remember my first couple years of teaching, I taught in high trauma areas, and now like being online and seeing people comment on teachers and education and how classrooms are run, and kids like structure and they don't like a guessing game of what's going to happen next, especially in those high trauma areas. And people will comment on like, well, that's controlling, or that's this or that. And I'm like, you have no idea what it's like to wake up every morning and not know what the day is going to hold. So at least school is a safe space for them to know that. you know?
I couldn't agree more. And I think that, like anything, it's trying to find this really good balance, right? Of like systems and structures, but then also paired with a lot of love, and also moments of autonomy and moments of choice for students too.
Yes.
So that it's, they know what to expect and they know what's going to happen, but they also like can choose what the text that they want to read, or they can choose the partner that they might want to work with, or maybe in centers there's like multiple choices of centers that students can choose and go to which one they want, or at recess time they're able to select who they play with and what they do, or at lunchtime they get to sit by who they want. Now there still might be some routines and procedures and things sort of like built out and all those things to ensure safety and fun, but it's a balance of those things so students have the ability to sort of like learn and grow and become independent thinkers as well. So no, there's absolute truth to everything you're saying.
This is awesome. How can students get involved in creating this positive learning environment? It sounds like you empower them as well as the teacher.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The way we sort of build our work, it's like ultimately it's like your classroom are the students, right? Like, and you're building sort of the culture that you want based on the students you have in your classroom. We work really hard with teachers to ensure that students' voices are sort of part of the work. And so as you're establishing routines and procedures and different things, like getting students' feedback, getting their support in doing it. When I especially as kids get older, they want to be engaged and involved in creation, and they want to have their voices heard, and they want to know and understand that they're a part of the process as opposed to the process happening to them, especially of course into that secondary, so middle school and high school settings. So as much as teachers are able to involve students in the process, the better. In the lower grades, we also work really closely with parents and train them on a lot of the things that we do, because it helps even at home, right? Using the sort of nonverbal techniques, making sure that you're low breathing, that you're using sort of a quiet, private voice when you're talking to a student or a child, especially when they're upset or angry about something. It immediately helps calm the situation. Everyone, including the person that's probably really pissed that this is happening as a parent. I can speak to that very specifically. The child is throwing a tantrum about, wanting the red marker versus the green marker. Being the
How old are your kids?
They're 4 and 2.
Oh, yeah. So you know that.
Do you have kids?
Not yet. No. Wow.
So that's right. You just got married last week. So, you still could have kids. So we try our best to make sure that teachers are really leaning on student and student voice to make sure that they're setting up an atmosphere in their classroom that is really student driven and from a place of influence.
I love that. When we went into the pandemic and teaching online happened, I feel like classroom management, at least for me in my classroom, I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea how to make sure each and every student was engaged. It was really, you can't read their face. Some of them don't turn their cameras on. Did you guys do anything to really combat that?
Talk about, in almost 20 years working in education, the last few years is just like,
whoa.
We thought we'd seen it all. And then it's like,
they're like,
literally
no.
One day at school, the next day you're not,
yes.
right? And you're not coming back for over a year, right? Of course, no one knew that. So I'd say the biggest piece, it was this intense pivot, and then partnered with almost zero support and training and or resources, right? So it took months for people to get to a place where they even felt comfortable using a platform like Zoom or Teams or whatever the case may be. And so, our work was also very in person, on campus training, in classroom, one-on-one coaching.
Right.
And so we had to make a big shift too. And so as teachers went virtual and schools went virtual, one of the things we did immediately was like, okay, our work, while still relevant, needs to shift.
Yeah.
But also top of mind for teachers isn't necessarily like, how to use specific techniques to manage my classroom effectively. It's like, how the hell do I even teach right now?
Right.
So we surveyed teachers and administrators to what do you really need during this time? And a few things big things came out of it. One, we need help on the technology that we're given to become masterful at it, because that's a huge part of that engagement, of that management of the students, is how can you effectively use all the tools like breakout rooms and the reaction buttons and, the whiteboard functions and how best to use everything from Pear Deck to Google Slides, all of it. Right.
Yeah.
And there was zero really training from districts.
Right.
Yeah. And so we jumped in and, tried our best to become experts at the handful of major platforms that our schools were using and did trainings on them, right, across campuses, and did one-on-one coaching with teachers on how best to use Google Slides and the different functionalities paired with Teams and or Zoom and or Pear Deck, on and on and on. And then the second big piece was around student engagement, specifically in a virtual setting. It's one thing to do sometimes a song and dance in your classroom to get your students engaged. It's really difficult to do that virtually. Yeah. And so how do you build in, so many different things into your lessons to be able to capture students' attention while still honoring the fact that many have, either crappy technology or lack of really good internet and all those things to make sure that students are still learning and moving along. So, lots of tips and tricks around that student engagement piece, but then also how do you follow the students effectively? How are you using chat functions and other things? How do you build in a schedule of one-on-one check-ins with students to kind of see where they are? Varying types of assignments. So just not the same old thing always, but can they send you a video of themselves talking through a response to a question as opposed to a written? Can they, submit, graphic representations as opposed to written, or pictures or videos or other things? So really thinking outside the box, right? And finding ways to stimulate students in a really different way, especially given the fact that they're at home and many are helping take care of siblings and making meals and on and on and on and on, to try and sort of navigate all the things that are on their plate. So it was a huge shift, of course, for the world and for when teachers just they were already angelic in my book, but the last few years, they are true. It is just unbelievable what teachers have done these last few years to really continue to be focused on students and make sure that they are learning, but also loved and taken care of through the process.
Yeah. I feel like with teaching online, you had to be at a 10 all the time, and you had to up the next best thing to keep their attention at all times. Otherwise, there was, because at least I remember in my classroom when I was feeling the kids were overwhelmed, we could do circle time. We could sit just in silence for 3 minutes and have that.
You could sing songs. You could play music. You could read quietly for a few minutes. There's a million things you could do.
We would do yoga, or we would just hum together, just to chill. And you can't do that on Zoom because kids are just going to log off.
Totally.
And I think that might have I know it does have something to do with that teacher burnout that everyone is talking about.
100%.
So do you have any advice for what admin can do to help all of these teachers who are feeling this way?
Yeah. that is the $1 million question, right? I think I was, reading recently that here in the Houston region, something like 45% of teachers are looking to leave the profession right now. I'd say, there's a handful of things, right? One, ultimately, like making sure that in partnership with making sure that students are like ultimately first in decision making, it's like how are we also lifting teachers up, right? To be almost at that same level, right? Like schools are only as good as the teachers on their campus,
100%.
right? That's it. And so when I say that, what I mean by that is like there are so many things that are on a teacher's plate. It's like, how can you as the leader truly look at what a teacher is responsible for and pull things off their plate, like continually, and make sure that they're able to really focus on just a few things. Like we know that just teaching and learning in the classroom, if they're just focused on that, that's a lot.
Yeah.
So like, how can you pull all the administrivia, all the extra meetings, all those other things off so they're able to like create still really amazing lesson plans and think about how they're executing at a high level so students are learning and that they're able to really focus on the relationships and the management of their classroom so they can effectively deliver that instruction. And that the other stuff can be pulled off their plates and managed in some separate way.
I love that.
I'd also say and then I'd say like that paired with just like lots of opportunities for love, right? So what can you do to support them in even the littlest ways, like making sure that there's coffee all the time and little treats for teachers and that you're really honoring their time. So, all the ridiculous meetings that can be emails and all that stuff, like how do we sort of move away from that? And then also like being really creative around schedule or to ensure that teachers have adequate planning time, which is really hard right now. And so like, how are you rearranging the schedule in a way that teachers have that opportunity to collaborate with their teammates and content mates and also have that one-on-one time to grow and develop and also just like get stuff done. So they're not like spending hours and hours and hours in the evenings and the weekends working on stuff.
Yeah, I love it. That was a great answer.
Oh, good.
I've asked that question a couple times and that was the best. I love that. Yeah. So last question for you. Of
course.
As an educator and a parent, what do you hope that the future of learning looks like for your kids?
As I think about the future and even like the short-term future, it's like, I want my kid to love going to school, right? And a big part of that is that teacher and the relationship that they're building with my kid. I want my kid to feel like the teacher loves them.
Yes.
Right. And that's hard. And that's a lot on a teacher. But that will my kid will eat out of that teacher's hand, literally, if they're able to do that.
Yeah.
I also, though, want my kid to be challenged academically, right? And so I want them to like be in a rigorous academic environment. And so, that can look a lot of different ways with a lot of different teachers. And so as I think about like what the future is, it's like, I don't know, right? Like that's a big question. The hard part, the crazy thing though, is that things haven't changed that much in 20 years. The pandemic, I think, has allowed for us to think outside the box a little bit more. And like technology was always something that people tried to use, and they were forced to really dig into it. My hope is that people continue to leverage technology as a important tool in building.
It's the future.
Future. Yeah, it absolutely is. And I hope that this has forced education to really think of technology as not just this supplemental resource, but truly like an integral part of their classroom, because kids need that, right? It'll help them love going to school every day. Yeah. It'll also really help this component of like rigorous academics happening.
Yeah. I think that's why we're struggling so much, because education hasn't changed.
No.
But the times have changed and we're not keeping up with it. No. So there's just like this big boom of what the hell do we do now?
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And so it's funny, like, again, after 20 years of working in education, of course, like I'm an optimistic person. And so I'm hopeful. I'm also really worried.
Yeah.
Right. Because of what you just shared, like things are progressing at a snail's pace and kids are falling behind because of that.
Mm-hmm.
So like, what are we as a society and what are we as the adults in charge, right, going to do about that?
Right.
Right. And We have a lot of work to do to make sure that every kid has access to a really great school. And I'm a parent who has some means, so I'm able to make some of those choices and do some of those things. But, if I was a parent that didn't, that'd be 10 times more difficult. And that's not okay.
Yeah, no, that's not how it's.
Every neighborhood school should be phenomenal.
Yes.
And every kid should be able to go to that school and get a loving and rigorous education.
I love that. Amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much for.
It was so nice to meet you. Thank you.
This was great. I had the best time.
Same.
All right.
And congratulations on your wedding. That's exciting.
Thank you.